All right, well, good evening. My name is Kurt Scher. I'm the director of Booz Allen's Innovation Center here, and welcome to FedTech graduation. It's going to be a really great night. It truly is one of my greatest pleasures to host events like this. For those of you that don't know, Booz Allen's mission is to empower people to change the world. And for those that are going to be pitching tonight and speaking tonight, I think that really resonates with what you're doing from your standpoint in terms of really making a difference within DoD. Tonight we have the opportunity to hear some inspiring ideas, some very interesting pitches from engaged and passionate people. These pitches are going to be about imagining something new, really about change. And sometimes we're so immersed in what change is, we sometimes forget how fast it's moved. And so for a minute, I want to use the internet as an example. So imagine right now, I've got in my pocket a check for $10,000. And I'm going to give it to you, but all you have to do is agree to never use the internet again for the rest of your life. How many people would take that check? I see one hand. That's interesting. How about $50,000? $50,000 to you tonight if you promise never to use the internet again. How about $100,000? Same guy. How about $500,000? That's getting a little more interesting, right? How about $1 million to go into you? All right, a few more. But still, in a room of 150 people, I saw 4 hands. This experiment was proposed by an economist named Michael Cox at Cornell a couple of years ago, and out of his entire undergrad class, exactly 0 people would take $1 million to never use the internet again. That's really interesting if you think that that's just an 8 to 10 year kind of phenomenon where that amount of change has happened so quickly that it is vital to our lives. So how many ideas can we hear through FedTech that are going to have that type of change to the way that our government is doing business? We at Booz Allen are really focused on that. So in 2016, about 19, 20 months ago, we opened our doors here in the Innovation Center. And our goal is to set the conditions for innovation, to really get teams and a DC community to ask questions about what if and why not, and to really think about what it takes to get the discipline of innovation to occur, which is really how do you know what ideas you should be thinking about? How do you prioritize those ideas in the right way? And then how do you make those that you prioritized real and relevant? And that flow and that process is something that all of us in this room think about, but is really, really hard to execute. And so that's one of the reasons we love Ben and FedTech. So people tend to underestimate the federal government. I think everyone in this room would agree. I can say that as a former federal employee. But we all know that there's power and belief in mission. And what we're going to hear tonight is going to be powerful. DC is helping to lead that charge. So I know our Deputy Mayor, Brian Kenner, is here. You're going to hear from him shortly. He's a big supporter of DC becoming an ecosystem for entrepreneurs. We're also looking forward, and I'm personally looking forward to hearing from Stephen Witt. Stephen's a partner at Data Tribe. And for those of you that don't know, Data Tribe is an organization of military veterans, startup founders, and investors who try to take and turn exceptional talent and technologies into world-class products and product companies. We also have Morgan Plummer from MD5, who will be, Morgan's the COO of MD5 and is a visiting senior research fellow from National Defense University. And then we also have Dr. Jag Pamalupati, who's responsible for all of the DoD labs, which encompass, and some of them are in this room, encompass an enterprise of more than 39,000 scientists and engineers working in more than 60 defense laboratories, warfare centers, and engineering centers across 22 states and District of Columbia. So please give me a hand in welcoming our speakers, which you'll hear from in a minute. So on behalf of all the Booz Allen leadership, I could not be more pleased that Booz Allen is supporting this work. And I look forward to seeing how we can continue to be a great partner to you, Ben, and to FedTech, and to all of you to make these things happen. And so with that, please welcome the founder of FedTech and my good friend, Ben Solomon.
Hey guys, thanks for coming tonight. Kurt and Lynn and the rest of the Booz Allen team, thanks guys. This is a beautiful facility and always amazing to be here. You guys are a real partner. So wow, we're actually, it's end of the cohort, always kind of a sentimental time for the teaching team. But for those of you that are brand new to FedTech, welcome. Just to give you a little bit of overview on the program, so we build companies out of federal technologies. So we work with federal lab partners. We're up to about 25 across the country, with across DoD, DOE, NASA. We scout for innovations, and then we scout for entrepreneurs to pair up with those innovations and put them go through a cohort structure that you'll see some of the results of that tonight. Just to give you a little details about this cohort here, this is our biggest ever. We had 13 teams. In the course of the 2.5 months that we were together, those teams did about 400 plus customer interviews. We had hundreds of pivots. We had hundreds of interruptions by our teaching team. You can, for those of you that have gone through the program, know that we don't pull punches. We push you guys hard. And many frustrated moments, but a bunch of learnings that you're going to see the results of tonight. I want to thank our teaching team. If you guys just could stand up, Bob, Patrick, Andy, Ali, and Jamie. Great to work with you guys. And then if we could just have, this program is really nothing without our federal lab partners. So if our federal labs from this cohort or past cohorts could just stand up quickly for those of you in the room. Yeah, I want to thank, the City of DC is a great partner to us through Sharon Carney, and also want to thank Ballast IP as our law firm of choice for all of our teams, get help with Ballast. And, you know, one of the things that's always a little bittersweet, so we have 13 teams, we're only going to have 4 of them present in this session, but what I want to do is just have each team stand up and get recognized that's gone through our cohort. So from Army Research Lab, we had a team built around a computer vision technology. Could we get our ARL team, I think, is in the back, to stand up. Great job, guys, thank you. We had 3, this is the first time ever working with Army Medical, 3 teams built around med tech. So if we get all 3 teams to stand up, MRMC teams, one is anti-plaque chewing gum, our first gum ever in the cohort. HBV diagnostic and liver fibrosis diagnostic teams, if you guys could all stand up. From Air Force Research Lab, we had a 3D sound technology go through. Where's our Air Force team? Great job, guys. One of the cooler technologies that we've had in the NASA Langley electric field imaging system. This is some next gen stuff here. Thanks, guys, good work. From Fleet Readiness Center North Island, we had an aircraft thermal leak detector technology. Do we have our North Island folks in the house? Good job, guys. And then last but not least, we have 2 NSA, National Security Agency teams, ScribeZone, which is an online language courseware, and then our flexible electronics manufacturing team. Can we get the stand up in a NSA in the house? Great job, guys. Really, it's been fun to work with each of you throughout the last 2.5 months. So what I want to do now is just introduce Deputy Mayor Brian Kenner is going to talk about some of the things going on in the district. I really feel like the DC is the best place to start a tech company around R&D, and we're really happy to call DC our home of operations for FedTech, and excited to have Deputy Mayor Kenner here talk about some of the neat things going on in the district.
Ben, thank you very much. Again, I am Brian Kenner. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development in Washington, D.C. Very excited to be here to address you all just for a few minutes about some of the things that are happening in Washington, D.C. And I think Ben sort of stole my thunder a little bit, I am extremely excited about the opportunities that Washington, D.C. has around entrepreneurship, around innovation, and increasingly actually around exploring some of our gazelle business sectors, which we think FedTech sort of squarely fits into. I think maybe 10 years ago or so, and just by a show of hands, little audience participation, how many people have lived in the District of Columbia for more than 10 years? Raise your hand. How many people have lived in the District of Columbia for more than 3 years? How about more than 2 years? 1 year? All right, so we've got a mix of people here. Over the last 10 years or so, Washington, D.C. has very much, and even our region, has changed significantly. I think there was a perception, obviously, which is not unfounded, that we're a federal town only, right? That the public sector drives our job growth and all of the people who come and spend time here in the District of Columbia. Over the last 10 years, we very much have been diversifying away from the public sector. We are increasingly driven by private sector industries. That's not to say that the federal government doesn't still impact our economy, but really everybody in our entire region has had to be focused on how do we continue to grow in other ways, and Washington, D.C. has been no stranger as it relates to that. Partially as a result of that sort of diversification, we really are starting to be known for tech and innovation. I think that many publications have called us the #1 place for women entrepreneurs in the entire country. That deserves some applause, by the way. Our region has been known as the #1 place for growth for entrepreneurship. CBRE, I think, recently said that we were the 3rd strongest tech economy. And if I try to read the tea leaves, which I try not to do, to be perfectly honest with you, if the sort of search for Amazon's new headquarters is any indication, Washington, D.C. continues to be on one of the top 1, 2, or 3, 4, or 5 most prominent cities that Amazon will consider. That deserves some applause too, by the way. But I think a lot of that is really just recognizing some of the internal strengths that Washington, D.C. has. We are a young place in Washington, D.C. We are a place for entrepreneurs. We are a place for thinkers and doers. And I think that increasingly, as we have diversified away from the federal government, we have put those same skill sets to bear on all kinds of problems and all kinds of industries, and that has helped make us really the economy that we are today in Washington, D.C. One of the things that we have chosen to do, I think, on the local level is to think about, well, how can we be a catalyst for a lot of this innovation and entrepreneurship activity that's happened? And so I think a few years ago, Washington, D.C. was a fairly prominent investor in many of the incubators that you see in Washington, D.C. That was sort of our first wave of innovation. We provided some funding to startups and so forth. We still do that, but I think that increasingly over the last couple of years, we also have chosen to make sure that we devote some resources around inclusive innovation. We know that we are naturally a place in Washington, D.C., as I mentioned before, that is a place for women entrepreneurs and also people of color entrepreneurs. And so Washington, D.C. has made some investments, most notably a new inclusive innovation incubator that's located close to Howard University on Georgia Avenue, which opened this year, that really seeks to be a home for sort of people who are underrepresented in technology, who wanted to make sure that we completed the ecosystem. And we're very happy to make that investment because we want to be a catalyst for what is a competitive advantage in Washington, D.C. The Washington, D.C. also continues to be a place that we think about from an economic growth perspective. We recently did a new economic development strategy in the District of Columbia, and we really focused on some of those areas that we felt had the opportunity to propel our economy, not just for 5 years, but thinking about where we're going to be 10 to 15 years from now. And FedTech was one of those areas that we identified that was going to be a significant growth opportunity for us. We already know that Washington, D.C. has one of the densest concentration of federal labs in the entire country, and we want to make sure that we take advantage of those opportunities. We are increasingly seeing other companies choose Washington, D.C. as their home. We know that we have recently attracted Yelp in terms of one of their East Coast hubs to Washington, D.C. The region recently got Nestle to come to Washington, D.C., and we've been very happy to have the opportunity to work with even smaller startups, the Fiscal Notes, the Transit Screens of the world, who find Washington, D.C. a prosperous place, not just because they can sell their products or services here, but they're finding the talent here in Washington, D.C. They're able to attract people here, and they're also finding that ecosystem or that community that can make their workplace the place that it is. And so increasingly, Washington, D.C. is the place to be, and I'm very happy to be here to just provide a few opening comments around Washington, D.C., and hopefully you all have a great time talking a little bit more about FedTech, and hope to see you all around the ecosystem soon. Thanks.
Just to present our honorary member of the cohort, certificate, and then our FedTech beer mug, so you can remember us during the Well, guys, so just as I think DC is really trending in an amazing direction relating to tech entrepreneurship, DoD is also, and I want to recognize MD5 National Security Technology Accelerator as the sponsor of this program. And for those of you that are interested, you were recruiting for our spring cohort. So for those in the audience that might want to go through and be on the team experience, certainly interested in talking to you. MD5 also has a lot of other opportunities, though, that Morgan Plummer, the COO, is going to talk about just here today. So Morgan, thanks for being a part of the event, and welcome.
Well, good evening, everybody. I know you're not really here to hear me talk, so I'm going to try and keep my remarks pretty brief, because I think there's some phenomenal ideas that we're gonna get exposed to tonight. So I am Morgan Plummer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of MD5. We're America's National Security Technology Accelerator, and we are really focused on one thing, and that's changing the way that DoD solves its problems. And that really is for this reason. It's because if you look at the mountain of data and history that comes with the Department of Defense, one thing that can be proven beyond a doubt is that left to its own devices by itself, the department can't solve all of its problems. We have to look elsewhere and externally for help, and a huge part of that means that we have to engage with people and with networks, and that means academia, and it means the venture community, and it means the startup community, and it means local governments. It means pulling together a huge pool of folks so that you can access the talent that is in this country. Because if you believe, as we do, at least at MD5, and I would go so far as to say at the Department of Defense, that talent is, in fact, equally distributed across race and gender and geography and state and district and territory, then the number of people that the Department of Defense employs vis-a-vis the national population is almost criminally small. And so if we don't expand our networks, if we don't introduce new ideas, if we don't introduce new ways of thinking, and more importantly, and perhaps most importantly, if we don't start to just think about the problems fundamentally differently, then the department's going to get left behind. And so this notion of pulling together groups of people, this notion of building enduring human-centered networks, as it turns out, isn't just kind of a cool, altruistic, good thing to do. It's actually an existential national security imperative. And so pulling together these collaborative opportunities, pulling together these human-centered networks, FedTech is really a flagship program led by the very capable Ben Solomon that really embodies everything that MD5 is trying to do and everything that innovation in the Department of Defense ought to be about. And so for those who have showed up to sponsor technologies, for those who have sponsored to show up as part of this cohort, for those of you who raised their hand and said, yes, I'm interested in trying to solve a problem that confronts the Department of Defense, I am deeply, deeply grateful. On behalf of myself, on behalf of the director of MD5, Jay Harrison, and really, I go so far as to say on behalf of the department, thank you for your willingness to try and help us solve our problems. So, I think that probably leaves it right there. But I do have the deep pleasure and honor of introducing Dr. Jag Palmapati, who currently serves as the director of the Defense Laboratory Enterprise. He got his career started as a researcher with ARL. I am sad to say that as a graduate of Michigan State, he is also a Wolverine, but we won't hold that against him. He has risen through the ranks actually quite fast and quite high. We're very lucky to have his advocacy, not just for the FedTech program, but for MD5 overall. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Jag Palmapati.
So thank you for those kind words, Morgan. And thank you, Ben, for inviting me to give a brief talk today. I know that Ben is the founder and a leader, and he's an inspirational leader. And he was such a good a speaker that we had invited him to speak at our annual tech transfer workshop last year. And he did such a great job, and it was such a well-received talk that he doesn't know it yet, but we're going to invite him back this year to keep on delivering his message about technology transfer and innovation. So Ben, I hope you have some time open on your calendar next June. You should see an invite soon. Being part of the leader of the DoD Labs office and the enterprise, I'm actually quite glad to see the large number of DoD participants in this cohort. I think 11 out of the 13 are actually DoD entities, so that's really good to see. And Morgan, I think you kind of the things that FedTech and MD5 bring to the table are very unique to DoD, and I think it's just it's a sign of the changing times. I think, Kurt, you indicated, the test that you ran about what people would be willing to give up, or what monetary value would be worth giving up the internet. I think somehow, you did include inflation in that. I think if the numbers got a little bit higher, you probably had more takers. But the internet is so pervasive in our society that I don't think you could survive without using it at some point in your life today. But Morgan indicated some of the things that MD5 is doing for DoD. This is just one of the areas where MD5 is really being helpful to the laboratories and to DoD in general. Another area that he didn't mention were the hackathons that MD5 hosts. Those have been really interesting events. I went to one up this summer at MIT doing fabrics, looking at fabrics, and it's a way to bring in a community of innovators that don't normally work with DoD to help us take technology that we're developing, expand on it, and deliver a product associated with it. Now, Kurt already mentioned all the statistics about the DoD laboratories. It was amazing. Someone must have fed him all that data. Either that or our website is working and people are reading it. But some things that he did mention was that DoD does have within that enterprise, we do a large amount of cooperative research and development with a laundry list of entities, from big corporations all the way to small businesses. About 3,000 agreements that we run through each year. And we also managed to file our scientists and researchers in the DoD managed to file over 900 patents in this past year. But really, innovation is really what we expect to keep our military superiority and to enable our military superiority. And we understand that as Morgan indicated, that we can't do it on our own. We are highly dependent on the private sector, both academia and industry and small businesses, to really help us bridge that valley of death between a concept to a product. And then programs like FedTech are key to kind of overcoming that bridge, as they help our scientists and engineers really take a look at the technology they're developing, kind of think about it in other applications, and allow it to see to become a product which the DoD could ultimately end up leveraging and procuring in the future. So in terms of why we do this and the importance of tech transfer to DoD, it's great. We concluded a study a few years ago looking at what the economic impact of the licensing that DoD does. And we found during that study that over time that it equated to over $50 billion in total economic output. It created over 12,000 full-time jobs, and with an average salary of over $70,000 for those jobs. And so there's a rationale for doing it. The DoD is very supportive of it, and anything that gets us to take a look, get outside of our box, and take a look at expanding and new ways to innovate and develop product is, definitely we're definitely push on many avenues. And so I'd say that just to, finish and get started with the presentations, the first thing I'd like to note is that as I was looking through the list of presentations and then looking through the posters, I noticed that we actually have a winner of a Laboratory Science of the Quarter here from SPAWAR. Ben Taylor, who actually won that award, is now giving a talk, I think, tonight. Hopefully he'll give me a talk tonight, but he was at the poster. So it's we have very talented scientists, engineers, and we're happy that they can take advantage of such an opportunity. But I want to say, tech transfer is very key to our existence in DoD, and anything that we can do to support that, we're interested in helping. And so, we love to work with MD5 and FedTech. It's been a great collaboration, and I'm glad that we're getting more and more scientists, engineers across the laboratories taking advantage of that. So with that, thank you, and looking forward to the presentations tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And really, if you guys think about all the technology that DoD has invented that touches our lives every day, Kurt was mentioning the internet, right? Started as a DoD project. Everything in our iPhone, actually, a lot of it came from DoD inventions, and really working with the DoD lab system. I think we're gonna try to capture the next wave. Okay, now to the fun part. Can we get our first team, NOC WD China Lake, to come up and do their pitch?
Yeah, I was afraid of that. Can you hear me? All right, good. All right, so hi everybody. So we're Team Naval Air Warfare Center, and our innovation is a portable real-time sensor for toxic nanomaterials. So I'm John Sadowski. I'm a chemist specializing in nanotechnology. I'm currently at NIOSH, formerly at Harvard. This is my partner, Michael Haggerty. He's an internet entrepreneur. He ran a company that created some of the world's largest websites. And our two other team members, who unfortunately couldn't fly in from California today, are Jordan Planillo and Michael Torres. They're the inventors. They're from the Naval Air Warfare Center. All right, so the problem with nanomaterials is they're hard to detect and identify. They're very widely produced nowadays in industry. They make their way into a lot of consumer products. And keep in mind, we're not talking about small robots, because I know that's what you're thinking about. These are just very small particles of common materials. For example, the sunscreen that everybody uses every summer, that's made out of made out of titanium dioxide nanoparticles. They're safe when you put them on your skin, but if you think about the factory where workers are making these, they can get into the air, they can be inhaled by workers, they can cause respiratory inflammation, cancer, all sorts of other bad things. This is a big thing because if you think just about titanium dioxide, just in the US, we make 1.45 million metric tons of it every year. So that's a lot of workers who could be exposed. So we have this need to monitor worker exposure to these nanomaterials. So the problem is, we don't only want to detect them, we also want to tell something about their physical properties. What's the size, what's the shape, what's the composition, because these tell you essentially how nasty they are when you inhale them. The problem is existing technologies don't do a very good job at doing this. For current real-time detectors, they're built for larger dust particles. They don't do very well for nanoparticles, and they don't really tell you much about them, about their properties. If you want to know the properties, you got to send a sample to a laboratory and put it under a big fancy electron microscope. It's expensive, takes a lot of time. Your workers are being exposed during the delay, so that's something you want to avoid. So our product uses a novel technology from the US Navy to detect and analyze these nanomaterials. So it's portable. So you could have it in your hand as like a tricorder. You could go whoop, 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 and tell exactly what's in the air. Or you can put it on the air or put it on the wall and forget about it and get the data. It's reliable. It eliminates the lab work, saves time and money. Workers will be healthier due to having less exposure. And you can also avoid fines from government agencies such as EPA and OSHA, which is always a good thing to have on the top there. So I've told you about our application. So how did we get to this point? How do we decide that this is the right application for this technology? So it turns out the underlying technology has a lot of uses. It's just a novel way to make a certain kind of radiation. There's a lot you can do with that. We spent a lot of our initial time just trying to discover what are all these possible fields of use and turning them into an actual value proposition. And then we spent some time whittling down to 4 main value propositions that we then studied and did interviews in depth. And Michael will tell you about those.
There you go. Do this either way. Thanks, John. The core technology that we're talking about using is a graphene terahertz emitter. Everybody knows what you can do with a graphene terahertz emitter, right? Yeah? Okay. So neither did we. Okay, several PhDs in the room and I all had this opportunity to sit down, brainstorm, and think about commercial applications deeply, at the start of this to figure out what we were after. After we did that, we started into some initial interviews trying to identify what the market might be. And we managed to discount a few of them. For networking and fiber optic couplers, we actually collected some data that suggested this might actually be too future tech. Data centers aren't ready for how fast this potentially could work. We liked medical devices. We didn't like regulatory and certification processes. We didn't want to go into something that'll take 10 to 20 years to develop. We don't have that kind of tolerance. We looked at structural analysis. We talked to a lot of people who operate bridges, tunnels, turnpikes, things like that. And what we started to find is that the burning need, like the big kind of issues that are out there, are not necessarily ones that we can solve. But one of the great things that that did was it kind of led us into our discussions about environmental safety. And we're pretty confident in the market for this application of the technology. In 2014, about $480 million was spent just on environmental assessments. Another $720 million was spent on lab work. Those are 2 sort of separate processes. There's a lot of data that suggests these numbers are going to continue to grow. And like we said, our job with this product is to eliminate some of that laboratory testing. We estimate that about $240 million annually can be saved by businesses, just eliminating some of the more common environmental tests that are out there. So this looks like, to us, it's a pretty, interesting market. To try and validate our hypothesis, we examined some very broad applications of this technology. What we did to start was focus on mass production. To make our interviews more efficient, what we did was we tried to find areas of overlap between environmental sensing and structural analysis. That way we could, talk to one group and, maybe get answers in both areas. But where we started really was to think that there is a market for a device that can detect defects for products coming off assembly lines. And we also sort of assumed that regulatory agencies like NIOSH and OSHA had a hand in defining like what devices are out there that people are going to want to work with. Our interviews really challenged our assumptions. Okay, we ended up in a very different place after we started talking to groups. So some of our first interviews were with Black & Decker and some other companies that are involved in building, large-scale consumer products. We wanted to see where our product could fit into a structural analysis use case with them. The answer was it doesn't. There is no market there, which was fun, but it led into another set of conversations. We started talking with people at NIOSH about how sensors really could be used, within factories, not just in mass production, but in other areas as well. One of the areas that NIOSH is really most concerned with right now is nanomaterials. Okay, things that are 2 microns, or less in size, the things that you can breathe. The devices that currently are being used to detect nanoparticles in the air were built 20 years ago, and they were built to detect dust, okay, which is much larger than a lot of what goes into our clothes and other consumer products these days. So there's this reliability problem. Not everybody is always certain about the reliability of their tests, and that's actually a pretty big issue. We talked to a lot of industrial hygienists, okay? We just sort of went down a list calling different industrial hygiene firms to learn more about this problem. People started saying the same thing, really, that analysis happens in 2 stages. First, you go on site to detect what's going on. Second, you send stuff to a lab. There's a big gap there. It exposes companies to risk, and that's something that organizations would like to correct. What people really care about at the end of the day is size, shape, composition, and concentration of particles. That's what came out of our interviews and kind of what we learned. So I know we're running out of time. What I wanted to do was really just make it clear that it was these interviews, this process, that helped us to scope out the market, understand what's there, and understand where we fit in over in the bottom left-hand corner. Right now, the service market for industrial hygiene really is organizations reaching out to industrial hygiene consultants who come in and do the work. Organizations don't do that work internally. Our market really is to sell to these groups, okay, and to find ways to insert ourselves into the supply chain there. So for us, this technology is a go, okay? We definitely need to look at funding for how we're going to proceed, but refining our business model, I don't think is going to be incredibly hard, and we kind of already know who our first customers are. So that makes this a not very hard decision for us. And that's it. Any questions?
So tell me what your aha moment interview was.
Ooh, that's fun. Yeah, okay, so the question is, what was our aha moment interview?
I don't know, do you have one?
Well, Black & Decker, when they started saying there's no use. Well, Black & Decker, when they started saying there's no use for our technology on production lines, that convinced us we were going down the wrong path. That's an ah-nah moment. I've never formally done market research before. I was exposed to a lot of materials there. When I started seeing what the numbers are and I started seeing how things are divided, that made it make sense for us to go in this direction versus some of the others. When we started doing interviews with industrial hygienists and they all started saying the same thing about size, shape, and particles, that's when we figured out we could really have an impact in this area. Are there any other questions? Environmental sensors are kind of boring, so. Was there one? No, or not? Okay, well, thanks, everybody. That was fun.
All right, can we have our NASA Langley team come up? NASA Goddard, excuse me. Goddard. You ladies, yep. This is our second. We were lucky enough to have 2 graphene sensors in this cohort, so I guess graphene is in right now. But
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sarah DeLeo. I have a PhD in biomedical engineering. These are my teammates, Leila Wahidi with a PhD in political science and Adria Wilson with a PhD in chemistry. And we're going to talk to you today about working with Mahmouda Sultana on her molecular graphene sensor, and she's from NASA Qatar. Oh, thank you. Okay, so Mahmouda originally designed this graphene sensor to detect signs of life outside of the world, right? So these are single molecule carbon nanotube type sensors that detect things we find here every day. So like oxygen, water, nitrogen, those sort of things. So it was our job as part of this cohort to find other viable markets for it. So again, it's a single molecule detector. It can be arrayed, so we can have it detect different chemicals all at once. It's reusable and recyclable. It's lightweight and portable, and 3D printable, so that means we can change a form factor to make it fit our needs. This is our initial business model canvas. You probably can't read it from where you're sitting. That's okay. The take-home message is that in the beginning we had a lot of market space we're looking at. Different sectors could potentially use this sensor to detect really small quantities of whatever they needed to find. So we looked where these low-level detection capability could result in high-impact decisions. So these are a few of the customer segments we looked into and conducted interviews with. Oil and gas. We looked at environmental contaminants, food spoilage, and chem bio threats. In the end, medical diagnostics seemed to be the most promising technology that we could make life-saving decisions based on very small quantities and small sample sizes of medical samples.
So when we first started doing customer discovery interviews, what we started to hear right away is that antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, is a huge problem. So when a doctor or someone prescribing antibiotics misuses them and uses them to treat an unidentified infection or disease, it creates this vicious cycle where microbes become resistant to treatment, people get sick, and then we can't treat them. So it's a problem that, as we spoke to people, we had boiled down to two separate sub-problems. One, positively identifying the cause, the nature of an infection, that is to say, whether it's bacterial, viral, or something else, is a powerful tool for someone who is giving out antibiotics to use to manage their antibiotics usage and to potentially not use them and to limit the prevalence of AMR. Second, identifying the degree of resistance of a strain that may be the cause of a person's disease right now means that you can identify the right antibiotic to give right away instead of waiting the 2 days that you might otherwise have to wait. So you can start to be more effective in your usage in that way, and you could also potentially save lives that way. So one perspective on AMR that we got was from nurses and physicians who are the point of care in hospital settings and other medical settings. We heard from them that the current state of things is that outbreaks of resistant infection occur in hospitals on a monthly basis. And when those do occur, outbreaks often require time and a great deal of resource wastage to take care of. For example, you may have to throw away everything in the hospital room of an infected patient. We also found out through our interviews that there's currently no method for detecting what type and the resistance of an infection that a patient might have at the point of care, like at the bedside immediately. You generally have to wait 2 days to send that sample to a lab to allow the bacteria to culture first. And we saw this as a way that we might be able to potentially address that. We heard from these people that they want a low-level detector that works quickly to determine the type and the sensitivity of an infection, but we also heard that they need the buy-in from their hospital administrators as well, who make the purchasing decisions. So another perspective, we spoke to a number of people who work for global health organizations. We heard very similar things for them. Something that they told us as well is that if we're going to have a device, it needs to cost similar to an antibiotic, so $5 or less per use, because that is also a factor in what you're going to give people when you treat them. So the final thing we started to hear from these people is that they would offer to collaborate with our inventor, which to us was a signal of the urgency of this problem.
So we found a very urgent problem. This is something that is a top priority for WHO, NIH, CDC, everyone we have talked to. When we asked them, what are your top 3 priorities, this was it. But the other thing we heard was that this is actually a technically challenging problem. It's the top of everybody's priority list, and yet we don't have it yet. So these are some of the technical challenges. But rather than going into all of the technical detail, I can narrow them down to 2. And they both relate to figuring out what it is you're trying to detect. The first is that there is a lot of bacteria in your body. So if you take a swab from the back of your throat and culture it, you're going to find a lot there. Turns out a third of children, healthy children, have strep in the back of their throat. They may get a viral infection, go to the doctor, strep will come up positive because it's there. Doesn't mean the strep is what got them sick. So that's something that we are still trying to figure out. And the other issue is that when it comes to resistance, that's a very big problem. There are lots of potential things to target, and they change. Right? New mutations happen. So we wanted to focus it in. We have labs wanting to work with us to develop the AMR diagnostics, but we need a smaller minimum viable product, a stepping stone, so to say. So we wanted to focus on encephalitis. And there are three things about encephalitis. The first is that you detect it in cerebral spinal fluid. It's a sterile target. Yeah, so there,
Sorry.
yeah, no. Actually, no, that's true, let's do it. So it's a sterile fluid. So it, if anything is in your cerebral spinal fluid, it's probably what's causing the infection. Second, we sort of know there's a limited number of things we could be searching for. So we're not looking for as yet unknown mutations. We know what we're looking for. And it's really urgent. So compare this to another sterile fluid, urine. That's another thing that's easy to detect in, but somebody's not going to order an expensive test. It's E. coli. We know where the E. coli came from, so it's not as urgent. Whereas encephalitis, the faster you do it, the more neurons you save, the more of the person's essence you save, if they survive at all.
So briefly, to compare this to our initial business model canvas, we were able to focus in on a medical customer segment, those dealing with infectious diseases. Some of our value propositions became doing diagnosis fast, cheaper than the other alternatives, making it easy, and detecting very small concentrations with limited background noise. We're almost out of time.
So we are a go. We think this is very needed. Others are wanting to work with us. But to go very briefly about how we want to get there, we want to start out by connecting NASA Goddard with some NIH researchers that we've spoken to. Some of these researchers have some clinical samples, and this is a great way, because these researchers are physicians, to start to get buy-in before we even have the product or have gone through FDA testing. Because when it comes to the medical field, one thing is that it takes a long time for physicians to start to adopt technologies, even once they are recommended by the CDC and commercially available. So the earlier we can start getting buzz, the better. And because cost is an important issue, we want to use a subscription service because graphene is reusable and can be refunctionalized. And since that's the biggest cost, we think we can bring costs down and make this viable that way. Any questions?
Hi. It's your last night. We didn't even do this much during this semester. So who buys? I get how it works. I get other researchers. But who did you find when you go into the medical environment? Who's going to be the buyer of this?
So what we found is that, at least in a hospital setting, it's sort of a two-body problem. You have to have doctor buy-in, but you also have to have buy-in in the hospital administrative C-suite, if you will. So I think for us, it would be a matter of proving that we have a proof of concept, going to a diagnostic company, and then working with them once we have the correct approvals to approach people at multiple levels within a hospital structure to try it out.
And one thing to add to that is because of the way a lot of global health is funded, a lot of times it's the grant agency. So Bill and Melinda Gates decide what gets used because they paid for what got used, and they can just buy a bunch of it and send it out. So there actually are some very expensive diagnostics that are used everywhere because they decided they should be.
So I have a question. The previous talk, they discussed the fact that the whole regulatory aspect of approval was a negative for them. So how did you overcome that as a barrier?
I will take a shot at this without having, like, okayed this with my team members, but I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're very mission-driven people. It's part of what guided us to start narrowing down where we wanted to initially look. This is clearly a very big problem with a high level of urgency, and it could take a long time, but I think we want to at least go in with a healthy level of naivety and see where it takes us.
Oh, go ahead. Just that we are still at an early stage of development, that there's a lot that would have to fall into place before we really pursue that level of investment.
And I think that because it's such a high priority for so many health agencies, that not that they would, ever approve something that for clinical use that wasn't ready, but that I think there would be encouragement and prioritization of something if we could get that to work.
So in terms of depth and breadth of impact, and I had a chance to chat with you all going around earlier. So I know without an MVP or without a prototype, it's hard to say, but can you give a sense of the scope of the difference or the differential in the testing speed? Because that's one of the things that you highlighted as part of sort of the pitch, and what, at least a broad sense of what that differential might look like.
Days. So right now for most antibiotics, for most bacteria, you have to take it to the lab and culture it, which means you have to grow it for 2 days before you can detect anything. Because our sensor is at the single molecule level, we can, the amplification step happens at the electrical level. You don't have to amplify the bacteria. There are some diagnostics, CRISPR diagnostics in particular, that can be done in a few hours. So those are genetic tests. So we think we can compete with that and possibly cheaper.
So encephalitis is caused by a variety of pathogens. How are you going to get around the issue of looking at which bacterium, which virus, which fungus is causing the encephalitis?
Yeah, so, and also to add to that, whether it's autoimmune or not autoimmune, because I think if somebody has encephalitis and you're trying to save their life, then, just put them on the antibiotics if that's gonna work, because time is of the essence. So right now there is a host of tests that are run, and some of these tests are slow, and some of these tests are just, wait to see if neurological deficiencies appear. And so we think we can improve on that. One of the great things about starting with encephalitis is we know what a lot of the common targets would be. And so we can functionalize the surface of the sensor with all of those targets, perhaps having 4, right? So for viral, bacterial, fungal, and then looking for example, protein counts. While preserving cerebrospinal fluid, because you don't want to have to take much.
Great, thank you guys. Do we have Stephen Witt here? And so our next keynote is Stephen Witt from Data Tribe, and Stephen is really lucky to have you here tonight. Has kind of lived the experience that I hope our teams get to go through of being in government, leaving government, starting a great company, selling a great company, and now he invests in great companies. So really lucky to have him here to tell his story today, and thanks for being part of the event.
Thanks, Ben. Ben, how do I get the slides to show up? Perfect, thanks. Sorry, not a Mac user. So when Ben asked if I'd come talk tonight, I thought I'd give kind of highlights over the course of my career, starting in public service with the State Department, eventually, many years later, doing my own startup, and then today, a couple years after that, serving as a venture investor here in the DC area. So my public service story really starts in December of 1998 when I was on winter break home from college my senior year. Had no idea what I was going to do after I graduated, so I went on Yahoo and typed international jobs, and State Department was the first result that came up, and I thought, this sounds good. I'll apply, I'll never hear anything back, but we'll see what happens. Turns out, exactly 10 months later, I joined the Foreign Service, and a few months after that, I was overseas working in Europe. So did a tour with the State Department in Stockholm, came back, did a domestic assignment, and then went to grad school. Grad school's wrapping up. I thought what I really want to do is go back to DC and take some of the things I've learned about innovation and business and apply that in the federal government. So I joined the CIA. Spent several years there, including my last 2 years over in Iraq, where I worked with my wife. And what was really kind of shocking or surprising to me was almost none of the technology that I used on a day-to-day basis was commercial software. In fact, the only commercial software I used semi-regularly was PowerPoint and Excel. Everything else was technology that had been developed by the government or government contractors, and this was technology being used on the most difficult data science problems in the world, finding the bad guys that didn't want to be found. And in the midst of that 2-year assignment, my wife and I started talking, and we said, you know, this is kind of crazy. There's this myth that government can't build amazing technology, and here we are using it every single day. Why don't we do a startup and take some of this technology and commercialize it and get it out into the Fortune 500 and out into the American public? So eventually, after 18 months of unemployment, after leaving the government and finding my way, I eventually launched a startup called Anyara in 2015. So turns out a lot of other people had come to the same conclusion that we had, that the government is actually a fountain of really fantastic technology. So this is a good example, a tangible example many of you are probably familiar with, from DARPA, where in 2004, DARPA did something called the Grand Challenge, where they had this vision that autonomous vehicles could navigate their way through the desert and get from waypoint A to waypoint B by themselves. The first year, it was a total failure. In fact, none of the teams finished. One of them crashed into a boulder like 10 meters after leaving the starting line. Complete disaster. But there was enough there, a hint of something really amazing in the future, that the government decided to fund a second iteration of this. So in 2005, I think it was 5 teams finished the course, and then they decided to amp up the difficulty by making the next challenge through urban environments in 2007. So just in a matter of 3 years, we went from being able to go 10 meters to navigating several miles through an urban environment. And what's happened today, I mean, you're all aware of this, but the really interesting thing here is if you go back to 2004, almost all of these companies today, almost all of the personnel, you can directly trace the lineage back to the 2004 challenge. The people that were involved working on their PhDs, the professors at the universities, the companies that provide the technology, it all goes directly back to that 2004 event. And Ben stole my thunder on this a little bit earlier, mentioning the iPhone. So this is kind of cool. The EU had a researcher, an Italian researcher, that was documenting the importance or making the argument that the government needed to do more to stimulate innovation in the economy. And she put together this chart explaining all the different technologies that went into the iPhone and iPod. And it's pretty cool if you see all the different places from the US federal government research or agencies that resulted in the hardware and software components needed to build the iPhone. And the really awesome thing from a US perspective is this source of innovation, this public-private innovation model where the US government funds innovation and the US tech sector advances it, enabled Apple to crush Ericsson and Nokia, who are absolutely the dominant players in this marketplace just a few years ago. So this gets to my startup. In 2015, we started Anyara, And the genesis for this technology actually comes out of the National Security Agency. It was some of the technology I was using at the CIA. And starting in 2009, 2010, I started talking to the developers of it and said, guys, this software is awesome. We got to get this out and build a company because banks, airlines, pharmaceutical companies would love to have this software. And what the software did was it enabled you to move massive amounts of data off of sensors very quickly, very securely to get it to a place where you could do analytics. Huge market opportunity. And graciously, the National Security Agency has a really cool program where they open source a number of technologies, secure version of Linux, secure like Hadoop databases. There's been a number of these technologies they've open sourced over the years. They did it for NiFi, and it allowed us to quickly build a startup around that open source technology and expand it for commercial use cases. So in March of 2015, March 9th, 2015, we started the company with myself and my co-founder, Joe from the NSA, who happened to be my brother. And 4 days later, we had our first commercial customer, which was a big US manufacturing company. And then 5.5 months later, we sold the company. And that journey, I think, is really contingent on two key inflection points that we chose to go down early on. And I just want to talk about those for a minute. So the first big thing was there's many ways to fund a startup. What we did was actually spend a lot of time thinking through what would be the optimal funding model for what we were trying to do, which was take government technology and get it quickly into lots of different verticals in the commercial marketplace. So we ended up using primarily angel investors right out of the gate. But over the course of the last few years, I've either participated in all of these or considered them to varying degrees, including early on in Anyara, where we looked at doing the Small Business Innovation Research Grant through the NSF, but just decided the timeline around the grant process wasn't a good fit for what we were trying to do. So here's a really specific example that I've only shown publicly one other time around how we put together the funding from angel investors to start the company. And the interesting part for me, or the scary part, crazy part, was when we launched the company, when Joe and I started working and quit our day jobs in March, we had only put in like $300,000, $350,000 into the bank account. Everything else was just things we were working on and we weren't sure we were actually going to get checks for. But because we ended up getting that customer the first week, that opened up the wallets and we were able to finish the rest of the funding round really quickly because we had a story and validation of what we were trying to do right out of the gate. What the investors didn't know was that first contract was $19,500 because the CTO could only put $20,000 on his credit card without getting anybody else to approve it or authorize it. So we quickly wrote a contract just below what would have been a much longer contract process, and that changed everything. Overnight, we were able to hire the rest of the team that we wanted because we had customer requirements, and then the rest of the checks came in fairly quickly, within a matter of a few weeks, actually. So the second part of the story is, originally, we considered taking venture funding instead of going the angel route, and the two questions that came up in the first two venture meetings were, how are you guys actually going to build this, and how are you going to sell it? So the building part was pretty easy. We had guys from the Fort that had been working on this software for several years together. We're able to reference some of the NSA press release material about how it was being used across different parts of the government. Proof that it was applicable to a lot of different mission use cases. The business part, though, about how we were going to sell it was a much tougher story because I never sold commercial software, and no one else had on the team either. So we ended up asking Rob Sater to join us as the sixth co-founder of the company. Rob was in the top 1% of sales at Salesforce for 2 or 3 years in a row at that point, and had been a friend of mine in college, and I said, Rob, I know this is crazy. I know you're making tons of money at Salesforce, but do you want to work on a really hard mission, a really hard challenge that could change the world? And Rob thankfully made that leap with us. And was in that meeting on the fourth day when we were able to close that customer quickly. And it turned out that the CTO of the company was really good friends with Rob. So that made all the difference. Having those investors, angel investors, and having Rob. Another thing that I hear a lot in the DC area is, we don't do tech here, we don't do startups. The reality is we don't have, as the federal government, billion-dollar budgets to market all the great technology we're doing or tell all the great use cases. So I feel like a lot of things just go below the radar that would be celebrated all over the newspaper or TechCrunch out in the Bay Area. So just in some of the spaces that I invest in, these are companies in the last couple of years that have been started, exited, raised venture capital. Tenable, I think, has something like $1 billion valuation. All these founders started their careers in the US government and have been able to go out, raise venture capital from the West Coast and build really awesome tech companies. So before I jump here, I want to actually go back. Here I left out an important point, or important thing. So we had this concept around, we thought this technology could be applicable in lots of different areas. We purposely sought out angel investors from different parts of the country. So New York, Dallas, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, places where we expected that we could find early customers for the product. Along with that, we looked for angel investors from different industry verticals like finance, oil and gas, tech, real estate, places where we thought it would be interesting to explore use cases early on, but we didn't have the right network or connections. However, if we could get an angel investor to write a check and be vested in what we were doing, we could get introductions to the people that would be opening doors for us to at least have those types of discussions and conversations. So we sell the company. I spend a year at Hortonworks, which is a big data company out of San Francisco. And then I'm talking to some of our investors in Onyara about what do I want to do next. What I wanted to do next was help other people that had made that same kind of career progress that I had, where you joined public service, worked on really hard mission, and then wanted to do the entrepreneurial route. So in the past year, we started something here in the DC area. Actually, our office is in Maryland, called the Data Tribe. And the concept is that we're the bridge really between public service, tech, and entrepreneurs, and the expertise around startups that you'd find for early stage companies out on the West Coast. So at Data Tribe today, what we've tried to do is incorporate a lot of the lessons learned from Onyara, places where we stumbled, we didn't have the right expertise, and where we struggled, for example, around raising the capital to start the company. So we put together a fund where we put in roughly $1 million to $2 million per company, and that's teams of engineers coming out of public service, military, NSA, CIA, FBI, NGA. We've looked at stuff at NIH, all across the spectrum of innovation in the DC area. On top of that, we bring together an operating team to help those companies. So everyone on our team that works with our early stage investments has both been in public service and has been part of a founding team that's had an exit or IPO themselves. So the whole concept is providing that expertise when you're first stepping out the door and launching your company. So in the past year, we've started 4 companies. The 4th one was just announced last week, but these were the first 3. Dragos was a team from the NSA working on industrial control systems. So these are sensors you'd find on oil and gas pipelines or in refineries. We funded them with $1.2 million last year. This summer, they announced a large follow-on Series A round, raised the bulk of that capital from West Coast investors. Over the summer, they were on the cover of Wired magazine, where they were able to break down how the Russians had hacked into the Ukrainian power grid last December. The second company is in Vail. They've developed a new type of encryption technology. We stepped in and funded that team with $1 million last September. They just announced part of their follow-on funding round of $4 million, and they took a different approach and took capital from strategic investors, Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg, USAA, insurance company, and a handful of others to really help them get those use cases for their early customers. And then the third one was hardware VPN technology that also came out of the US government, had been open sourced. We spent quite a bit of additional money early on to advance some of the R&D for additional commercial applications, and then sold the company earlier this summer as well. I was talking about our team, so this is a good slide. Actually, we've added 3 or 4 more people since this was made a month ago, but Bob, one of my co-founders, runs a venture fund separately from Data Tribe as well on the West Coast called Allegis Capital. Yonald started 3 companies out of MIT and then decided he wanted to enter public service, so kind of the opposite of the traditional route, and spent 7 years at the NSA working on innovation programs, specifically around the lean startup concept. Al's probably the most experienced attorney in DC around early stage company formation. Karen was the head of, our CFO was the head of the VCPE national organization for venture capital and finance. Jay was at In-Q-Tel for 8 years, and before that did his own startup. Ambika Gadre has been a product manager at 5 startups on the West Coast. Franz had an exit here in DC himself. Mike was a Navy SEAL and then has started 7 companies since leaving the SEAL teams in 2001. And then my brother Joe and myself. So that's very quickly the story around starting in public service, launching our own tech company, and then today being in the fortunate position to step in and help other people that are making that transition into entrepreneurship. Do I have a couple minutes for questions, Ben? So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer one. Yeah. Thank you.
Just wanted to ask how you connected with Hortonworks.
Yeah, so the Hortonworks story was they were the investment bank for Hortonworks, and one of the venture firms that we were talking with put us in touch with Goldman Sachs. The Goldman Sachs banker said, you know, you should really talk to the CEO of Hortonworks. What you guys are doing, I think, could be a really good fit for them. And it turned out that the product that we had been working on was a real natural fit for the markets and sales channels they had already developed. Anything else? Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Really amazing story. And you set a high bar selling your company in 6 months. And yeah, looking forward to working more with you. Have a great team and really a wonderful story. So we have 2 more pitches. So can I get our NRL team to come up?
Thanks, Ben, and really the whole FedTech team. It's been a great cohort. So I'm Dave Maurer, the co-founder of SenseTech, along with my co-founder, Usman Hafiz. Unfortunately, couldn't make it due to a conflict. We have worked on several past high technology companies together in the past, including one that has some drone sensor patent pending. We thought this would be an interesting technology. We've been very pleased and excited to work with Dr. Brandy Johnson from the NRL team, who's not only really, great person to work through. She's taken a past technology out of FedTech and commercialized it. Also, just a great person to work through and really a rock star in chemical sensing. She's out in California this week at a conference, or she would have been here as well. So to drill down into this technology, tell you a little bit about it. It's a patent pending algorithm that's built in conjunction with colorimetric sensors. It can detect both when a compound reaches a given threshold, but also anomalies that it comes across. It can be deployed in various form factors, such as point, arrays. There's a lot of different ways that we envision it working in the future. So going straight to the problem, and this is something that we started to uncover and continue to uncover through our 51 interviews. What are the existing problems around chemical sensing today? Well, they're difficult to update and deploy. There's often along with that, often a limited library of compounds that can be detected that's built in. And they're costly and typically highly energy intensive, given the onboard computation. So given that, working again with through these interviews, and Brandy and her team realized one of the real value propositions would be that through the NRL technology that we could continuously sense for up to 30 days versus the 2 days that's out there in existing products. Additionally, we can detect over 25 compounds versus really what tends to be a handful of compounds that are out there in the market today. And lastly, I think one of the most exciting things about the technology is the way they've architected it is that we can build in over-the-air updates to provide automatic updates such that we could tweak what's being sensed. So we started out with this business model canvas, really to break it down. Our hypothesis going in first few weeks of the cohort was that our lead customer segments would be some agencies within DoD, perhaps DHS. You see the use cases up here as an Army veteran. This made a lot of sense. Unfortunately, we did a lot of outreach, talked to a lot of different people, or a fair number of people. Didn't really see a pain point. Maybe we didn't hit on the right folks in those first weeks, but really didn't get any traction. So I guess I considered it fortuitous, really where the reality sunk in. And this is when we went to a Smart Cities conference a couple weeks into the cohort around IoT. We started to realize, wow, there's probably another market out there that we should be really digging deeper into. So I'll talk a little bit about something called Array of Things. It's a platform of sensors that's in 4 cities. We'll be in a lot of different cities. I think it's we're very optimistic about where that will go for our team. Additionally, I'll talk a little bit about port operators and some of their ongoing challenges around air quality and tell you a little bit more about how our technology will work with that as it continue to be developed. So very big numbers. I mean, we all have seen these types of projections. Smart cities, obviously a very large market, as you all know. Additionally, air quality management globally, about a $5 billion market. We're also, in the midst of building up our business plan, our financials, what it will take to build this up, bottoms up. We anticipate a software and a hardware model. We'll talk a little bit about that on upcoming slides. So to tell you a little bit more about the Array of Things, this is the type of box that you see in 4 cities. This is a picture of one in Chicago. There's various different types of sensors in there. So it can monitor things like traffic, both foot and vehicle traffic. In addition, chemical sensors in monitoring of air quality. So this was really, if you talk about the aha moments of our cohort, was when we brought the leader of the Array of Things, a gentleman named Charlie Catlett, together, a couple of his engineers with Dr. Johnson from our team. And their immediate feedback was, well, we've gotten, some traction and some good products there, but your technology is going to be able to sense more compounds. And so we found that to be really exciting, and we continue to double down on the smart city angle. To paint a little bit more picture on this Array of Things growth, I think it's important to note it's a technology that's been financed by National Science Foundation, Argonne Labs, some other nonprofits, as well as big players like Microsoft and Cisco that will help them to scale up. The ongoing activity that's happening here, as I said, they're excited about the capabilities of our technology. What we're working through now is sending one of these demo boxes to NRL and essentially integrating with that. So it's in 4 cities today in the US. We anticipate, or I should say they anticipate it going to 100 plus cities globally, both in the US and then where there's higher air quality problems, as you would guess, outside of the US. It's a very exciting project, and we're quite excited about how this is going to go forward. So shifting gears here a little bit, tangential to smart cities, we had thought about DHS and customs at ports, which turned into ports are really an area with all the equipment, ships coming in and out of them, containers. So an awful lot of air quality issues. So we kind of did another called mini pivot here, thinking, okay, we've gotten this array of things, and Ben really helped us think through looking at different angles here within ports. So as you probably know, if you understand ports a little bit, there's a large capital investments really going in pretty much across the board to make both more efficient, more sustainable port activities. So things like hybrid engines, plugging in ships at ports when they come in, bringing in electric vehicles, et cetera. So there's a real, along with those investments, a real need to be able to monitor that air quality. So I think another aha moment was in talking to the head of environment at the Port of Virginia. He laid out basically what's happening today in the market. He said, if you look at the West Coast for the last 10 years or so, you have some air quality management that's in place around Port of Long Beach, some of the other West Coast ports. However, if we look at this map here, looking at this, there's a whole lot of ports on the East Coast and in the Gulf Coast where there's not that special interest group push or related regulations. So there's, I think, we're really excited, another area of opportunity there to go forward with some further work with our technology in there. Just want to add one more thing to this. Through those conversations, we realized that, for instance, at the Port of Long Beach, the busiest port in the US, there's actually just 3 boxes monitoring air quality. And what you see here in the upper left-hand corner, it's a bit hard to see, but this is a pilot that the EPA did. They've done a few like this, where they take air quality sensors, put them on electric vehicles, and monitor where there's air quality issues. So we see other instances of local need for better air quality. So to bring this to close, I know I'm getting to end of time here, we built out our business model canvas. As you heard, we went through quite a transition throughout this. We updated our value proposition, things like over-the-air updates, very different customer segments, as you found, and really a slightly different application and new revenue streams. And it essentially boils down to these, top features, if you will: air quality, constant updates, and alerts being sent. Our technology, we feel, will be easy to deploy, will be low power, built through a data as a service model. I mentioned up front that we have some drone patents, things like emplacing of sensors, a whole system around that. So we're excited. This is a little ways off, but as regulations change, as these sensors become better, to apply both these technologies, ideally in the future. So to close, I appreciate all your time from the audience and attention. Essentially 3 things. Happy to talk now, afterwards, or in the future. Anything that you can help with traction on. I mentioned ports, other air quality, smart cities. I know many of you have contacts. Additionally, in either government or nonprofit grants, we're looking for ways to really accelerate our journey. And then lastly, we want to be cutting edge. It's a bit forward thinking on the drones and the FAA approvals. It's hard to navigate the FAA, we found. So we'd appreciate if there's anyone that has contacts or could assist us there. We'd really appreciate it. So thanks for your time. This is my contact information.
Have you thought about refineries or maybe large manufacturing companies as well that they can use this technology?
No, we have not to date talked to them. I think there's, clearly many applications around air quality. That would be another great application would be in those types of venues.
I believe you have a market there because I went to a school in Louisiana State University, and ExxonMobil has one of the largest refineries there, and the air quality there is pretty poor. And the company invests a lot of money on air quality there. So I believe if your technology is good as you say, I believe you have a market in the refinery or energy companies.
Yeah, no, very, very valid point. I mean, we want to be focused, have to be focused as a startup on one or two markets tops, I think. But great point. Thanks.
Yeah, and Dave represents a new contingent. We're coming in from Chicago. So the program, initially we started really working with entrepreneurs from, regional business schools and whatnot. But now we're working with people across the country, and they come in for the opening and the closing, and the rest can be done remotely. So it's it's great to work with you. Yeah. So our last but not least team is Team SPAWAR, and we actually are lucky enough to have the inventor from SPAWAR who flew in. Is Ben Taylor here? Ben, yeah, come on up with the team if you don't mind. And as Jag mentioned, very prolific inventor from San Diego. So great to have you here.
All right, well, awesome job, everybody. We are, I'll start off. My name is Jason Go. I'm an MBA candidate at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business. Standing beside me are my classmates, Santosh George, Dylan Poole, and no formal introduction, our inventor, Dr. Ben Taylor. And we are Team SPAWAR.
Thanks, Jason. So let's start off. What's common between the Hyperloop, the bullet train, the MRI, and more recently, industrial motors? Superconductors. Thank you. Now, there are two types of superconductors. There is this low temperature superconductors, which work at minus 400 degree Fahrenheit, which means there is a lot of cost involved in making it cool, because they only become superconductors at that kind of temperature. The other one is the high temperature superconductor, which can become a superconductor at temperatures like minus 200 degree Fahrenheit. It's still cold, but the good thing is now you can use liquid nitrogen to cool it, which brings the cost down substantially. The good thing about the high temperature superconductor is the temperature, but the other side of it is that it is brittle. It breaks, it's very difficult to machine it. Actually, today it cannot be machined. So which leads us to the invention that we are demonstrating today, which is a manufacturing process that allows YBCO to be machined. So now, what does that mean? It means that you have a superconductor now, which is less costly for the cooling part of things, and also can be machined. So we started by looking at seeing where is YBCO a good fit, but cannot be used today because it cannot be machined. In our initial conversations with Ben, we figured that we should do our research starting at superconductivity in MRIs, and that's where we started our journey.
Right, so we called every manufacturing company that we could think of, basically with a simple value proposition. Our technology will allow you to manufacture or miniaturize the magnetic coils in the machines, and therefore lead to portable MRIs, right, sitting in the back of an ambulance or on a helicopter. It's no surprise that that large coil is the most expensive component of the MRI machine. We actually learned from Siemens Healthcare that they vertically integrated this process back in the 80s. That's how expensive it was. And we crunched some numbers, and we came up to the projected U.S. spending on these coils alone to $1 billion by the year 2025. That's billion with a B. So we went back. We super excited about what we could do with our technology. as we learned more about our customers' manufacturing process, we learned that they used a low temperature superconducting material, whereas our technology was only applicable to high temperature. So we had to pivot, right? We used the feedback we got from the market. We used Dr. Taylor. We used the teaching panelists, and we moved up the value chain to the manufacturers of squid sensors. So we learned that Dr. Taylor's research was actually a little bit more geared towards the magnetic sensors, called squid sensors, and not the magnetic coils that we had originally thought. So that's easy. We redressed our VP, right? Our process will allow you to create smaller, more sensitive squid sensors. Squid sensors, by the way, that have been proven to produce images faster and with more accuracy, which in theory could then be put into an MRI machine and produce more accurate and faster scans of an MRI image. We were wrong about that, right? So if you can tell by the progress tracker on the bottom, this is just one of many pivots. We actually learned that the billion-dollar magnet that Siemens bought, this actually offsets the need for a strong or a stronger sensor, whereas what we heard about were experimental low-field MRIs, and these actually use the low magnetic field of the Earth and therefore require an extremely sensitive squid sensor. So with that said, we looked at that market and we identified some potential customers, but ultimately ended with low customer demand. We didn't actually see a viable market today. We saw something in the future, but again, took that information and moved further up the value chain to the thin film manufacturers of YBCO.
Yes, we learned that these squid sensor manufacturers didn't actually purchase the YBCO, but it was these thin film manufacturers. We were able to identify 3 major firms in the U.S., and we asked them about the high temperature superconductive squid sensor market. It was not a focus for any of them. In fact, the selling of the sensors themselves is less than $1 million annually today. What we did find out is that one of the major markets that these firms are playing in is power transmission, specifically using YBCO in the form of high temperature superconductive tapes, like you see in the top picture here and the bottom picture. The tapes today are laminated, so YBCO is a small middle piece of that, and they're laminated because of the brittle and poor manufacturing or mechanical properties that Santosh discussed earlier. Why these are used in utility power is a pretty awesome ROI. They carry 3 to 5 times the current as traditional copper wires do today. And copper wires also inherently have a 7 to 10% resistive loss to them. So our hypothesis was, can our manufacturing process help improve or make these tapes more applicable to more power utility applications? We heard pretty staunchly that the HTS tapes today are sufficient for what the market is demanding. The 2 things that they are limited by, though, is manufacturing consistency and cost, neither of which our process identifies, so we decided to move on from there. Some of the feedback we did get, though, is we asked these folks if our process could be proven to actually make nano grooves or channels into the tape, if this would be of value to them. They said yes. So we went back to Ben, validated that our process could be used to make these nano channels or nano wires, and he confirmed that for us. We went back to the tape manufacturers and asked, where would this be used? Where would you see the value today? And they all pointed to high-frequency applications, those where current is passing through a wire many times. Copper has resistance. That resistance turns into heat. It makes the design of particular applications very limited to that. So our value prop now is if our process can be proven to be used in these high temperature superconductive tapes, they would have a high value in these high frequency applications.
So our business model canvas, we had a lot of hypotheses invalidated. So the final value proposition we had is provide solutions to the growing demand for high temperature superconductive materials in high frequency applications.
Right, so how do we get there? So you can see right here, the first couple weeks, we pretty much just stuck with the big pharma and healthcare companies that we knew from household names. Week 3, we decided to expand outside of the Fortune 100 and start phoning other folks. We moved into quantum computing, cryogenics, even terahertz imaging used for security detection. Week 6 was pretty interesting. We actually reopened an invalidated market and got a warm lead into Cray Computing. And then finally, here we are today, last 14 days really, where we've started to get some strong leads and move into the high frequency application.
So the big question here is how we go to market. We see it pretty simply. The best way to go to market today is to license and partner with one of the high temperature superconductor tape manufacturers, which we've identified. These guys are already using their tapes in high frequency applications. Based on a market report, the market for high temperature superconductive tapes in these specific markets is projected to be $81 million in the US by 2030 and over $400 million globally.
So what do we do next? We recommend a three-phased approach. The first being a proof of concept wherein create these HTS nano channels using the manufacturing process. Once that is done, prove that it helps in creating a more efficient high-frequency motor. This is where we recommend partnering with GE. And once that is done, then would be the time to think of monetization, where we think licensing this manufacturing process is the way to go.
Right, so all things considered, we see no reason to stop here. We'd like to see SPAWAR move ahead and, again, demonstrate or develop a proof of concept and then partner with one of the manufacturers that we started relationships with over this 12-week process. Optimistic about that coming forward, but I think I speak for the three of us that say this was a long and tumultuous process, especially going through all the pivots. Really wanted to thank the folks that helped us along the way. It really was their relentlessness that got us to where we are today. Again, our inventor, Dr. Ben Taylor, our fearless leader, Benjamin Solomon, Andy, JP, Bob, and Jamie, and the entire teaching panel. The folks that put this together for us, that partnered SPAWAR, FedTech, and the Robert H. Smith School of Business. And of course, every customer that we had the pleasure with of working along the way. Thank you guys, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
So how exactly did you hit on the channels themselves?
Should we go back to slide 1?
No, don't go back to slide 1, but just like...
So it was an ask by one of the superconductor tape manufacturers, actually Superpower. We spoke with one of the senior product development engineers there, and he was the one who asked us to take this question back to Ben.
What question did you ask that person that got you to that answer?
So we pressed pretty hard on how our process could help improve the power conducting tapes, and it was a kind of a firm no. So we kind of started to think of other ways to use our process to make nano channels. Essentially, our value prop is we can make nano features in where they couldn't be made before. So we kind of thought about it kind of together. If you could take this tape, slice it up into 100 different pieces, now you have 100 different independent conductors, and cost is thrown out the window because now that $100 piece of 1 meter cable for each conductor is now $1. So it was kind of just a spitball between us. We confirmed it with the customer and then confirmed it with Ben Taylor that it could be done with our process.
Well, just to make a comment, I mean, the one thing I loved about working with you guys, over the last few months is that, if you have a restaurant app, you could go and interview 100 people in this room, and that you guys were working with a hard technology. It still sort of hurts my head to think about it, Ben. So you're, and you stayed with it. And you went and you found people that were hard to talk to within MRI manufacturing. I mean, it really impressive effort, and I was proud of the progress you guys made.
Thanks.
So So now these whatever product that we are coming up with, this is replacing copper. And what the conversations that we had with the manufacturer, the tape manufacturers, is that the commercial customers are very particular about the price, and the target is 50 kiloamp per meter. So that's the target range that we are looking at. Our manufacturing process has to create the tape at that price point. Otherwise, it's not viable.
To further that, the tapes today are about 3 to 4 times that of copper, and that also does not include the cooling cost, the liquid nitrogen necessary to run through these, to cool it, to make sure it's superconductive. Where they're being utilized today is mostly for substation interconnectivity, for redundancy, for city power grids.
Can you talk a little bit about the intellectual property framework for a manufacturing process?
I don't know.
Someone in this room I know, you just wrote.
I would say this. So these high temperature superconductive tape manufacturers are a special bunch. They, as we got to know these folks, they kind of have like a secret sauce way that they make their tapes, and they're very protective of them. We actually tried to get some samples for the presentation tonight, and they would not give any to us. So that's why we think, kind of, setting a license up with them and saying, hey, introducing Ben's technology and seeing, kind of doing like a pilot program to see where we can take this thing makes the most sense. But yeah, they didn't let us into their process very much at all. I don't know if that was a pivot or an answer.
We're out of time. So thanks, guys. Wonderful job. Thanks. All right. Thanks to everybody for coming. So that is it. That's the fall 2017 cohort is a wrap. Thanks again to our keynotes, and thanks to Booz Allen for hosting us. You guys are always amazing to work with. For those of you that are interested, we'll have a kind of an informal beer drinking at the Hamilton, a couple blocks down this way. We do have to be out of this space in 15 or 20 minutes, so definitely please kind of head towards the Hamilton. What I'd like to do is also ask all the teams to come up, and we'll try something we haven't done before and try to do a total group cohort. And then we also have certificates of completion, especially for the PhDs in the cohort. I know this is going to go right next to your doctoral degree on the wall. But again, on behalf of all the teaching team, really it's been a pleasure to work with you and to see the progress that gets made between, 2 months ago when you guys were brand new, you had just met your inventor, invent your technology, and then to see tonight is really satisfying. So last thing I'll just mention, for those, we have a lot of new faces in the room. We are recruiting for our spring cohort, so please go to fed-tech.org and put in an application if you want to be up here in the spring. So thanks to everybody. Yeah, so all cohort come up.